New Zealand's cabinet starting work to change the nation's gun policy. In response to the mass shooting in Christchurch, Prime Minister Ardern vowed the laws will be strengthened. Paris cleans up after a day of destruction on the Champs-Élysées. Yellow vest protesters left hardly any store unscathed. Now President Macron faces pressure to end the violence. And thousands rally in Paris in support of ousting Algerian President Bouteflika. They are showing they stand with Algerians protesting for new leadership. Our team takes you there. Welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Charlie James. And we begin in New Zealand, where Monday morning the nation's cabinet is meeting to begin examining its gun laws. This as the country continues to mourn Friday's attacks in Christchurch, which left at least 50 people dead. The firearms used were all purchased legally, and New Zealand has a relatively high rate of gun ownership. Shortly after the shooting, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern pledged that the country's gun laws would be reformed. Reporting from Christchurch, France 24's Rochelle Harrison-Pless told us what the debate is like right now around changing gun regulations.
The New Zealand Cabinet is meeting this Monday to discuss gun ownership regulations and specifically tightening laws surrounding semi-automatic weapons. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has confirmed, as you said earlier, that gun laws will change, but did say that any changes to the policy will take time. Now, currently there's no ban on semi-automatic weapons and there's no gun register. And actually, according to local media, there are approximately 1.5 million firearms here in New Zealand. That's approximately one gun for every 4 New Zealanders. We spoke to some people here over the weekend, and a lot of people we spoke to just couldn't believe how lax the country's gun laws are. That said, here in New Zealand, shooting and hunting is part of the culture, and we have heard reports from the hunting sector. They're just worried that there'll be a knee-jerk reaction. That said, they did acknowledge that change to the country's gun laws is needed. Now, the question now is whether New Zealand will follow Australia's example. That is following the 1996 Port Arthur massacre. Then Prime Minister John Howard moved immediately to tighten the country's gun laws, and now Australia has some of the tightest, strictest gun regulations in the region.
Another disturbing fact about this attack is that the shooter live streamed it on Facebook. And now the company has revealed it removed 1.5 million videos of the shooting in the 24 hours after it occurred. Prime Minister Ardern said Sunday that she wants answers from the social network on why the videos were able to be so widely distributed. Here she is at a news conference.
I do think that there are further questions to be answered. You know, obviously these social media platforms have wide reach. This is a problem that goes well beyond New Zealand. I've had contact from Sheryl Sandberg. I haven't spoken to her directly, but she has reached out and an acknowledgement of what has occurred here in New Zealand. And this is an issue that I will look to be discussing directly with Facebook.
Now to France. The day after Yellow Vest protesters trashed the Champs-Élysées, Paris picked up the pieces. One of the world's most glamorous avenues, tarnished by smoke, broken glass, and graffiti. Saturday's violence has drawn concerns that French police forces were not sufficiently prepared for the riots. Authorities have vowed to do whatever they can to ensure it doesn't happen again. Clement Bonnereau brings us more on the security response.
Overwhelmed by extreme levels of violence, security forces deployed on the Champs-Élysées struggled to contain and disperse protesters on Saturday, as the so-called Yellow Vests demonstrated for the 18th weekend in a row. Some 5,000 police officers were on duty across the French capital, but according to this union leader, not all units were deployed effectively.
12 units were deployed to protect government buildings, the Élysée Palace, the Prime Minister's office, the National Assembly, the Interior Ministry, which means they could not take part in peacekeeping operations on the Champs-Élysées.
Unions have also pointed the finger at the government's strategy, which was to gather protesters on the Champs-Élysées, but made it much more difficult to contain outbursts of violence.
It was our choice to concentrate everyone in one place, to stop the unrest from spilling over into other streets. But it made the situation difficult to manage.
The initial goal was to stop breakaway groups from leaving the avenue and wreaking havoc in other parts of the city, where a separate march against climate change was being held. Authorities say around 1,500 ultra-violent people took part in the protests. More than 120 were arrested.
The Algerian community in Paris once again lent their voices to protests against Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. On Sunday, a few thousand people gathered in Place de la République, one of the main rallying points in the capital. France 24 was on the ground and sent this report.
The square known as Place de la République, where so many French protesters have gathered for centuries, is now their focal point. French Algerians or Algerians living in France come here to protest against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika.
We want our country to be beautiful. We want it to be peaceful. And we have family in Algeria. So we care about what's happening there.
We ask all the government of Bouteflika to go away. We are not happy. We have young people, educated, who can take the place now. We need them.
Like in Algeria, this was the fourth weekend of protest against Bouteflika in France. And like the hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating on the other side of the Mediterranean, French Algerians have called for a new chapter in Algerian politics, hoping the change can be done peacefully.
We're demonstrating for a second republic. And it's symbolic to do it in this square. We want a democratic transition. Civil society will push for that reform. All of those very capable people can take us towards democracy.
These protesters were not convinced by President Bouteflika's decision not to run for a fifth term. And they plan to help fellow demonstrators in Algeria maintain pressure on Bouteflika and his inner circle until they're certain change is coming.
At dawn on Sunday, suspected jihadists killed at least 21 soldiers in central Mali. Driving cars and motorbikes, they stormed an army camp in the Mopti region and briefly seized it. The military believes the leader of the attack was an army deserter who joined a jihadist group. This is the latest assault on the military as the country fights the spread of extremist groups. Now an update on the investigation into the Ethiopian Airlines crash. The country's transport minister said black box data recovered from the aircraft shows clear similarities with October's Lion Air crash in Indonesia. Also on Sunday, Boeing announced it is finalizing its software update for the 737 MAX jets. Meanwhile, Ethiopians held funerals for their loved ones killed in the accident, but they did so with empty coffins. None of the victims' bodies have been formally identified yet because the force of the impact left few intact. Shirley Sipan takes us to Addis Ababa.
Caskets draped in the Ethiopian flag, with pictures of those who perished on Flight 302, but inside there is nothing. Recognizing the passengers and crew may take 6 months, and families need some kind of ceremony to help deal with the trauma.
She was very kind to people. I don't know how to describe her. We're broken and bruised very deeply. It's very difficult to speak.
This would serve as closure for the family. According to our tradition, you try to move on once you have reached this stage. We know that a person that is gone will not come back.
While families and friends mourned and several relatives like this man fainted in grief, the investigation over what happened continued. The initial observation that there are similarities between the Ethiopian plane and Indonesia's Lion Air flight that crashed in October are confirmed by the probe, according to a spokesman of the Transport Ministry. He says data collected, including from the black box recorders, confirm a clear similarity. The planes, both Boeing 737 MAX 8, started changing altitude erratically. Their pilots struggled to control them and tried to return to the airport. Both flights crashed a few minutes after takeoff. Suspicion focuses now on the plane's flight control system. The Seattle Times reports the system had crucial flaws, and its approval may have been rushed.
Flash floods in Indonesia's eastern Papua province have killed at least 58 people, a number likely to rise. The flooding was triggered by torrential rains earlier this weekend, and rescue teams are struggling to reach remote parts of the province.
Search and rescue teams have been working around the clock to evacuate victims, but authorities warn the number of casualties will likely increase as many remain trapped underground.
The joint search and rescue teams are still evacuating people, and not all affected areas have been reached. We're also working on burying the dead as quickly as possible. All those injured will receive treatment and compensation.
The floods in Sentani in Indonesia's eastern Papua province were triggered by torrential rain on Saturday. Waters are now receding, but they're leaving behind scenes of chaos and destruction, with debris and waste scattered all over the place. Authorities say hundreds of houses and 3 bridges have been damaged. Some 4,000 people have been displaced, taking shelter in 6 evacuation centres. Flooding is common in Indonesia, especially during the rainy season, which runs from October to April. In January, some 70 people were killed in floods on Sulawesi Island. However, authorities say that extensive deforestation has increased the risks. Tree roots usually prevent landslides by holding the soil in place. They also absorb water, slowing down the flow during heavy rainfall.
The Philippines officially withdrew from the International Criminal Court on Sunday, less than a year after the ICC began investigating its war on drugs. The country is the second to pull out of the world's only permanent war crimes tribunal. Clement Bonnereau has more on the reasons behind the decision.
It's final. The Philippines' withdrawal from the International Criminal Court takes effect immediately. It comes after President Rodrigo Duterte accused the organization of leveling, quote, baseless accusations against his government. This as part of an investigation into the country's controversial war on drugs.
Go ahead and proceed in your investigation. Find me guilty, of course. Can do that.
The ICC says it's looking at reports of extrajudicial killings in the East Asian nation. It's estimated that thousands have died at the hands of police and paramilitary forces since President Duterte came to power in 2016. The president and his government, however, say those deaths happened as part of legitimate police operations and that there has never been any intent to kill. The Philippines' departure from the ICC does not mean the Hague-based body will stop its investigations, but it will make it more difficult to ensure local authorities cooperate with investigators. The country is the second to leave the organization after Burundi in 2017. Some countries have never even joined it and have always refused to allow it to prosecute its citizens.
Good morning, everyone.
Last Friday, the United States said it would repeal or deny visas to ICC staff seeking to investigate war crimes committed by US troops in Afghanistan or elsewhere.
And finally, the world's biggest fresh produce market celebrated its 50th birthday with a record-breaking banquet. Located just south of Paris, Rungis Market set up a 401-meter-long table to serve lunch to nearly 2,000 people. Officials from the Guinness Book of World Records approved the bid, which beat the previous record of 322 meters. Many market employees took a break from work to take part in the banquet. Do stay with us here on France 24. There's more news coming up next.
Fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Fake news.
Join us on France 24 today for truth or fake. In English, French, Spanish or Arabic, we tell you how to go about debunking fake news. Join us today on France 24 as we sort what is true from what is fake.